Look at the worldview he is putting forth. And even this idiot, whoever wrote this anonymous op-ed, is saying, look, this guy tends towards authoritarianism. This guy is all about himself. This guy is erratic. He's petty. He's all of those things that I've been saying since, 2015. So nothing new here. Again, stuff we all knew. This was all on the Cliff Notes. But I do find it interesting that now someone felt that they needed to come forward with an op-ed that evidently the New York Times vetted this person, found out that they really are in the administration, and that if it were to come out, they'd be fired immediately, and Trump would probably have them executed. Because I think that's where his mind is. And look, can you imagine what's going on right now in the White House? The interrogations that are going on? John Kelly pulling people into the Situation Room and grilling them under a spotlight with a magnifying glass. Can you imagine how bad it's going to get for these people? Can you imagine the level of scrutiny of their cell phones, their emails, all of their electronic communications? I would even think at some point that Trump is going to say, you know what, we need to be chipping people for volume. We need to be putting little microphones and right in the inside of their brains so we know what they're thinking. That's how paranoid this guy is going to. It's going to get bad. When I saw this, I'm going, let the paranoia begin. Let the insanity ensue. And it's going to. He only gets crazier from here. Earlier today, he tweeted out like a minute and a half video, and it's well worth taking a look at to go, holy, you know what? This guy is president? This guy sits in the Oval Office with his finger anywhere near a button? I don't care what button, even if it's the button to turn on the TV. Watch the video. I mean, it's scary. And the really scary part to me in that video is behind him, you have representatives of virtually every level of law enforcement. And the messaging to that, I mean, stop and think about the authoritarian kind of messaging that comes from, I've got all the cops behind me. I've got the military, I've got the cops, and we're not going to put up with it. And we're coming for you. So whoever wrote this, I hope they were able to push it off several times into other directions to where it can never be traced. Because I truly believe if they do find out who this is, we will see public executions. That's how crazy I think this is making Trump as we speak. In fact, he tweeted out the word treason with a question mark, to which I responded, yes. It's not a hard question. It was a very simple answer, direct to the point. And I encourage everyone to do that. Get that tweet it back to him, yes. Because I'm telling you, the fun is only about to begin. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the confirmation hearings with Kavanaugh and some of the stuff that was going on today. Look, you've got unindicted co-conspirator in the White House. You've got a guy sitting right now to be confirmed to sit on the U.S. Supreme Court who, I don't care what anyone says at this point, has pledged a blood oath to not allow Trump to be impeached. That's the only way his name got on the list. And good on the Democrats for finding some bit of a spine, but we're going to talk about that as well. Also today, lots going on. Today, Senator Bernie Sanders and Congressman Ro Khanna came up with a piece of legislation going after these big corporations like Amazon and Walmart and others who are the low road employers who end up, their employees have to go and beg for food stamps and housing assistance and all of that stuff. They've got a piece of legislation that I think is going to be very interesting to talk about and hopefully will get us moving forward and holding these companies accountable. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Congressman Ro Khanna is going to be here to share his thoughts and, well, the legislation that he is pushing along with Senator Sanders. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. So listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Own 90% of the wealth, 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90%
where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1882. That was the day the first Labor Day parade took place in New York City. But whose idea was it? According to the late Jonathan Grossman, former historian at the Department of Labor, the first Labor Day occurred during a general uptick in working class organizing, strike activity, and militancy that year. Peter McGuire, Carpenters Union General Secretary, is often credited as the father of Labor Day, but others assert that Knights of Labor machinist and New York City's Central Labor Union leader Matthew McGuire was the force behind the holiday. The machinist McGuire had been active in the 8-hour movement and later as a Socialist Labor Party politician. By the end of the decade, 400 cities nationwide celebrated the first Monday of September as, quote, a general holiday for the working man. It was already an official holiday in most states when the labor movement started campaigning for a day of recognition at the federal level. Labor militants contend that by 1894, the holiday was promoted for its respectability against the more radical May Day. Another unanswered question remains regarding President Cleveland's motives for signing the federal legislation. The widely accepted view is that Cleveland hoped to win back labor's vote after federal troops crushed the 1894 Pullman strike in early August. But the president signed the legislation much earlier on June 28th. The nationwide boycott against Pullman cars, called by Eugene V. Debs and the American Railway Union, had just begun 2 days earlier. Did he hope to deflate the boycott? What do you think? For many in the Chicago labor movement, the fact that both Labor Day and May Day are linked to the city's history is a source of pride. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
So some good news today out of Washington. I mean, there's lots going on. The paranoia that is just gripping the White House, that's going to be fun. That should be a reality TV show right there front and center. Also, the Kavanaugh hearings, lots of fun there. But something else. Today, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Congressman Ro Khanna of California introduced a piece of legislation that I've been saying for a long time needed to happen. We need to hold these giant corporations accountable. We need to make sure that they pay their fair share and that, well, when workers have to go begging for food stamps or heating assistance or rent assistance or school lunch programs for their kids or Medicaid for their health care needs, we should be holding someone accountable. And that's why I've asked Congressman Ro Khanna to come talk with us, share some of the thoughts on why the Stop Bezos Act was introduced today. Congressman, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks for having me back on. And I appreciate that you've had this idea because it's absolutely absurd that you can have a company like Amazon that's $1 trillion company and people working there, working full time and still not making enough to put food on the table. I mean, the basic idea of a market is if you work hard and you pick a company that's doing well, you should do well. And what happens is the taxpayers get stuck with the bill. We're paying and subsidizing these employees' public benefits. What the bill says is let's have the employers, let's have Amazon or Walmart be paying the benefits of employees who they're underpaying.
No, I'm right there with you. And, I tell the story of my grandmother quite often. She worked at a small department store in Cleveland. It was called Uncle Bill's. They were a small little chain in Northeast Ohio. And when she retired in 1985 with a defined benefit pension, she was making like $8 an hour. Had full health care, full dental, full eye, all of that stuff, vacation, paid sick days. What that generation fought for and demanded, back, 30 some years ago. And today, what people are working for isn't much more than that. In fact, I would argue it's less than she was making at the end of her work life is what people are being paid today. And it's because she was part of a union. She was part of a union for almost her entire work life, and they fought for those things.
Rick, you're absolutely right. And historically, in 1914, As you know, Henry Ford said he was going to double his workers' wages. He took it up from $2.50 a day to $5 a day. Well, $5 a day, translated in current dollars, would be about $120, which would be $15 an hour. And it's sad that Henry Ford realized this back in 1914, that it was good economics, and now we have companies that are far, far, far wealthier than Ford Motor Company was, and yet they're not even paying their workers anything near what Henry Ford paid his.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of this, you've got these giant monopolistic corporations like Amazon, $1 trillion corporation, who are, they're welfare queens. They're leeching off the back of we the people.
They are, and let's be very clear where the money is going. I mean, because the money is going into stock options for executives. The money is going into share buybacks. The money is going into payouts for dividends. And it's not going to the people who are doing a lot of the work, who are actually assembling the packages or making sure that the packages land on the doorsteps of consumers. And it's just, it's wrong what's taking place.
So walk me through the legislation. What's the idea here? How do you see this? How do you envision this working out? What are you thinking?
Well, the hope is that the legislation will incentivize these companies to raise their pay and pay people a livable wage. But right now, the way the legislation works is, let's say you're working at Walmart or you're working at Amazon, and you're not making enough, where you have to rely on nutritional assistance, or you have to rely on a housing voucher to pay the rent, then instead of the taxpayers being stuck for that bill, companies would be taxed and have to pay that bill. So if you need $2,000 of housing assistance, the companies would be on the hook for that amount. And I think that will incentivize these companies to raise their wage to a decent level.
It's an interesting way of going about it. Me, as a union guy, I say we should be changing our ossificated labor laws to make it easier for people to join and form unions, and make it easier to go on strike, get rid of these permanent replacement stuff that goes on, give people an actual right to strike, have first contract arbitration, have a lot of this stuff that the Employee Free Choice Act was going to do. I think that's the path that I would have liked to have seen, but this seems to be another one.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I'm all for all those things, but, I just did, before coming on your show, I was on Tucker Carlson's show, and Tucker is for this bill. And so the interesting thing with this bill is it may allow us to build a broader alliance, because you don't have to be, even for unions, which I certainly am, or a progressive or a Democrat, to understand that there's something fundamentally wrong with the idea of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, a trillion-dollar corporation, not paying their workers a basic wage. That just offends the sensibility of anyone who believes in the dignity of work or markets or rewarding work.
Well, I mean, what offends my common sensibility is the fact that you got a guy who's at the top of Amazon, who makes an additional $250 million each and every day on top of the $155 billion he's already got. Not paying his employees a reasonable wage so that they can afford to not have to beg for handouts.
Yeah, and when you talk to some folks, they'll say, "Oh, but Bezos doesn't really have that in cash. He's not liquid. He's got that in stock." I said, okay, if you want to start paying workers, giving them some stock options that's going to give them a better life, fine. But let's just be honest about what's going on. You're not paying these folks. You easily could pay these folks, and you're giving all the stock options to a very small group at the very, very top. And here's what's sad about it. I actually respect the innovation and entrepreneurship of some of these folks. I think, great. You're figuring out, as Jeff Bezos, how to do better distribution. Fine. But why are you tarnishing your entire legacy? Why are you excluding people by not paying people a fair wage, especially when the hopes of communities ride on this? I mean, there's Paul Ryan's district, deindustrialization. They lost an auto factory. Guess who moved in? Amazon. And that's a big part of the economy. Well, they're paying $10, $11 an hour. It's not going to kill Amazon if they had paid $15, $18 an hour. But what they're doing is they're taking advantage of people's hopelessness. So any community wants them. They want the jobs, and they're just willing to take jobs that aren't paying enough, and then we taxpayers are left with the bill.
Yeah.
And I wish, if I met Jeff Bezos, I would tell him, be the Henry Ford of your generation. I mean, do something significant. As Bernie pointed out at the conference today, if one of the leaders does that, that could set a standard for everyone and really make a big difference.
Or the other side of this is we've allowed this race to the bottom to happen for so long that anyone who wants to be a high road employer is going to be harmed because all the other ones are still down in the primordial, down in the ooze at the bottom of the barrel. So it's always been my view that we need policy, we need legislation that sets a floor so that high road employers can be high road employers by pulling the others up. I'm curious your thought.
I completely agree with that, and that's why tax will do that. If you're not a high road employer, you're going to get taxed to be responsible for the public benefits that your employees are relying on. But I also think that in some cases, when you have the margins that Amazon does, when you have $1 trillion market cap, you have some flexibility. You can do things that are market setting. I mean, that's what Henry Ford did. I mean, to go back to that example, I mean,
Right.
He was vilified by other people in the industry. They said, "You're going to bankrupt us, and what are you doing?" And half the country wanted him to run for president. So I've told folks that all these billionaires that suddenly think they want to run for president and can run for president, and instead of hiring political consultants and putting out ads, what they ought to do is start doing something meaningful, like doubling the wages of their employees, especially when they have the margins. But I completely agree with you that we can't rely on the goodwill or enlightenment of business leaders. We need policies like the ones you talked about, with a stronger union protections, with better collective bargaining, and with holding these multi-billion-dollar corporations accountable for their underpayment.
No, I mean, and I'm a big fan of using the tax code to do it. So I think this is a perfect scenario where, what? Okay, fine. You don't want to pay your workers. We're going to subsidize them, and you're going to pay for it through a higher tax, which, I argue we should have a higher tax structure for people in the upper strata anyway, because, and this is going to sound mean and nasty and kind of, wrong, but I think we got too many billionaires already. Look, we've given them enough tax breaks. We've created a massive billionaire class by having tax cuts after tax cut after tax cut for the last 70 years. I say
Right.
we should be going back to the good socialist President Dwight David Eisenhower's tax code. Because you know what? We didn't have massive debt. We invested in infrastructure. Kids got to go to college without a lifetime of debt. Workers actually made a reasonable wage, and the Republican Party was actually in favor of unions back then.
They were in favor of unions, in favor of investing in the infrastructure of our country. They were in favor of investing in our universities. And they understood, yes, they celebrated entrepreneurship and markets, but they understood that someone like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos would be incentivized to create companies, whether they made a few $100 million or a few $100 billion. You don't need that gross disproportionate amount of wealth. How do I know this? Because they all want to give it away. But the problem is, and I applaud them for that Bill Gates and Buffett and Bezos are giving it away. The problem is, though, when it's done with philanthropy, private philanthropy, you get people's idiosyncrasies. So Jeff Bezos wants to spend it on space travel. That's probably not what the public good through a democracy would decide. We'd probably say, let's spend that money on education or infrastructure or healthcare. And so what we've done is privatized a lot of this wealth, and it's not allowing us to make the basic investments that we need as a democracy. And I think some of these folks, I know Bill Gates, I've heard him speak, and was reflective about this, get that it's obscene how much money they're accumulating.
No, I'm right there with you. And look, I'm someone who is completely against the idea of charity, especially charity that you write off on your taxes. If you want to do something nice for somebody, you do it without looking for a reward or a tax break or anything else. And the idea of philanthropy just drives me insane, because it's stuff that we should be doing for ourselves, not out of the goodness of the heart of some billionaire who has a pet project now. And it usually takes us down the wrong path anyway. But here's the thing that I come back to. And this is one of those moments where I do believe that conservatives and liberals and everybody else can come together on this. In order for Amazon to thrive and to do well, don't they need workers who have disposable income? I mean, even Milton Friedman understood this. The idea that you need to pay people a reasonable wage so that they can, you use the Henry Ford example as well. You need to be able to buy stuff. If you're a consumer-based economy, people need disposable income.
Well, that's the secret of America's economy and our success. We actually had a middle class. I mean, China doesn't. Other countries don't. They have a very top-down economy. We have an economy that has grown over the past decades because people have the money to spend. And when you look at the point you're making, if someone reads McKinsey's report or Bain's report, the place where Mitt Romney used to work, they say that the biggest threat to America's economic growth in the future is income inequality because people in this country may not have enough money to spend. That is from their analysis. So if you're looking at this and you care about the future of our economy, you want to have people who are working have more money in their pockets. And it's such a basic idea. And the sad thing about these things we're saying is that those are the ideas that built America. And I'm not saying anything novel. I'm just saying, why aren't we doing the things that work in building a middle class?
So what do you say to the person who says, Ro, that what you're proposing, and look, I'm all in favor of getting corporations to pay their workers better wages so that we don't have to ask for handouts. Look, every working person I've ever met, they want to be able to have their work fund their life. They believe in the concept. If you work hard, you play by the rules, you should get ahead. But what do you say to the person who says what you're proposing will actually make things worse?
Well, I say a couple things. I mean, usually one of the arguments they make is, well, these companies are going to start to discriminate. They're going to not hire women with kids. They're going to not hire people who they think are on public benefits. And we have very, very clearly in the law, it's that you can't discriminate. You can't discriminate against someone on public benefits. You can't discriminate against someone who has kids. Now, you could say, well, these companies are going to violate the law, but then you can make that argument about any anti-discrimination law. So I do think the anti-discrimination aspect gets to it. Second, people say, well, you're not going to be hiring people at a low wage, and it's going to make it harder to hire people at a low wage. But my view is we shouldn't have wages that are so low. I mean, we should have a wage that gets to $15 an hour for people who are doing very, very meaningful work. And who are working a full week. So if we raise that wage, what we're going to do is raise the wage throughout society, and it's another way of actually getting to a $15 minimum wage.
And that, to me, that's the hope, that we push forward. We increase wages. We increase the ability of workers to join and form unions and collectively bargain, and earn some of the wealth that they create. So good stuff. Let me ask you another question before I let you go. Today, the big the big hearing. I wanted to get your thoughts on the Kavanaugh hearing. I'm looking at a guy who's sitting in the White House who clearly right now some paranoia going on with the anonymous op-ed in the New York Times.
Yeah. You have a guess on who that is?
I'm saying it's Mike Pence. I'll buck in for a promotion.
That's the best answer I've heard all day. They could write a movie or a script or something about that.
No, that's where my first thought was. I go, this is bad propaganda. It's all over the map.
That's giving Mike Pence too much credit. I didn't think he was savvy enough to come up with something like that.
Well, I'm sure his wife did it for him. Mother did it for him.
Of all the people, Melania is about the only person who I've seen ever stand up to Trump. I mean, Melania stood up to Trump more than almost all of Congress has in terms of the Republican Party. So, I at least respect her when things get so absurd that he's insulting LeBron James or taking babies away from their mothers. At least Melania has some decency to speak out.
And slap his hand away, even if she did wear that stupid coat. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the hearing, because you've got a guy who in my view, and you can tell, you can not go along with me, but in my view, he got on the list solely because he pledged a loyalty oath to Trump that when you're indicted, when you're impeached, when the treason charges come, you're going to be okay in my book.
Yeah, well, look, I say I know the type because I went to law school where he went, and there were two types of people. One who believed in things, and they went out and they worked for Human Rights Watch, or they worked for conservative organizations. There were people who really believed in the cause. And then there were those folks who just wanted to be president or wanted to be on the Supreme Court, total careerists, the gunners who try to make a good impression with the professors to get the Supreme Court clerkship. And that's who Kavanaugh is. I mean, early in his career, when he thought he would get ahead, going after Bill Clinton and trying to besmirch him, he did that. Then when he wanted to become a judge, he totally changed his tune and said, "Oh, I'm not for the independent counsel," even though that's how, by doing that dirty work, that's how he built his reputation. Then he said, "No, I'm not for that." And so he's going to pledge his fidelity to power, and he's told Trump, "I agree with you, exactly what Trump wants to hear." There's no moral compass there, and that's why we need to oppose him with everything we can and expose him to the public.
No, I'm right there with you. And I just wanted to get some of your get a thought on it because I'm looking at this going, oh, please, there's got to be a way to stop this because you've got a guy who, if you read this op-ed, is erratic, is petty, is adversarial, is just plain out of his gourd, who has nominated this guy to sit for a lifetime appointment on the court. And I'll tell you, I look at Gorsuch, didn't want him there. This guy even worse.
Well, and Rick, you raise a very important point. I mean, I read somewhere that our Senate, 18% of the population in this country is going to represent the majority of the Senate. And I think one of the things the Republicans have figured out is the demographics and people's opinions on policies against them. Most people in this country are going to support Medicare for all, neutrality, debt-free college, better collective bargaining. And so their only hope is to enact counter-majoritarian policies, to have a network of donors like the Koch brothers that can throw more money at it, to have a Supreme Court that's going to be there for 30, 40 years to block progressive policies, to elect senators in low population states throwing resources at it that can block legislation. And that's what we're really up against, where you may see policies that have 80% approval, but through counter-majoritarian institutions and strategies are being blocked. And that's what Kavanaugh represents. No,
you're absolutely right, which is why I say we go back to the top marginal tax rate of 92% like it was under Eisenhower so that they stop wasting money on destroying our republic. Just kind of my thought. But, Congressman, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the thoughts. Keep up the great work. I look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Always a pleasure to be on the show. Thanks for all you're doing.
Good. Thanks so much, Ro Khanna. You check out his stuff. Good stuff. Take a look at the Stop Bezos Act. I do find it quite interesting that they went to the Bezos way. But you can share your thoughts, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1882. That was the day that the first Labor Day celebration and parade took place in New York City. The New York Sun printed a vivid report of the parade of 10,000 marching workers. The paper described, quote, men wearing regalia, men with society aprons, and men with flags, musical instruments, badges, and all the other paraphernalia of a procession. The article went on to say, quote, as far ahead as one could see, and as far down the side streets as forms and faces could be distinguished, the windows and roofs and even the lampposts and awning frames were occupied by persons anxious to get a good view of the first parade in New York of working men of all trades united in one organization. All along the line, cheers were sent up. The reporter described the colorful banners carried by each trade union and noted that following the bricklayers came, quote, 2 decorated wagons containing brick arches. On each side of one of the wagons were the inscriptions 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for recreation. And get on to it, the union will never surrender. From New York, the idea of setting aside a holiday for workers spread. Oregon became the first state to officially recognize the holiday in 1897. Colorado, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York established a Labor Day that year as well. By 1894, 23 more states celebrated the workers' holiday. It was that year that President Grover Cleveland declared it a national holiday in response to the Pullman strike and boycott that began in Chicago. Labor Day is the day to honor the sacrifices made by labor fighting for safe and fair workplaces. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
The day is new, and everyone is waiting on you. And you got time.
So the Stop Bezos Act, or the Stop Bad Employers by Zeroing Out Subsidies Act, would do what I've been saying for a very long time. There should not be welfare programs. There shouldn't be. Your work should be rewarded. And I do believe everybody should work. I believe everybody should have some type of task. Everybody is capable of doing something so that we have this world where we can't be sliced and diced and pitted against each other. In fact, we had Andrew Yang on not too long ago. He's running for president on the idea that everybody in the country should get $1,000 a month. The idea of a guaranteed basic minimum income. Enough to put food on the table, a roof over your head, or just your bare necessities. That should be funded. Now we can argue if $1,000 is enough, or it should be $1,500, or whatever. We can argue that. It's always been my view. And look, I was a kid who grew up in the projects. When I was a kid, my mother, we were on welfare on and off a lot. I remember having to go to the store with the clown money to buy just simple things, and then the humiliation and the it's probably been it's been 44 years now since an incident happened to me as a kid. I was like 8 or 9 years old, and I still remember the woman. I still remember every detail of the humiliation of, can he buy this? Is this something that they can use with these? And it's one of those things where I often joke, if she's probably dead by now. And if she were, I'd like to know where so I could dig her up to kill her again. Because it was that kind of moment it left a scar on me. And it was one of those things that I want no one to ever go through. And it's probably one of those driving things that why I'm such a crazy workaholic. But at no point should anyone have to beg for help. In the richest country in the history of civilization, at its wealthiest point, we have one guy worth $160 billion. It goes up so fast that they can't even calculate it. We got a handful of people in this country who control more wealth than half of the nation. Literally people you could put into a good-sized minivan who have the same wealth as half of a 330 million person nation. Tell me there's not something wrong with that picture. Tell me that wealth hasn't been redistributed in a way that punishes work and rewards gambling and rewards, hoarding or policy. Someone in the chat room said we need to go back to the days of the 71% tax rate. Yeah, when Reagan took office, top marginal tax rate was 70%. Kennedy had dropped it down from 70 to 70 from 92. Think about that for a second. Top marginal tax rate used to be 92% in this country, which meant if you made $1.6 million in today's dollars back in 1953, they taxed that dollar over $1.6 million at 92%. Now, no one paid that 92%. They paid somewhere in the 60s, 70s. Because they funded schools and they funded libraries and they funded hospitals. They got to choose their philanthropy. And we as a society said, this is where you can do that. It's not the Wild West. Go, do whatever crazy thing you're going to do and we'll subsidize it. No. You do these things. This is what we need. And if you're not going to do it, we're going to take it and we're going to do it. This is what this is about to me. We can argue whether the Stop Bezos Act is a good policy or it's a bad policy, if it's going to do what they want it to or it's not going to do what they want it to do. To me, it's about having that conversation of, do we believe in the idea, the concept of reward for work? Do we believe in that idea of a meritocracy, that through your work, through your labor, through your blood, sweat, tears, through your effort, that you can support yourself and your family? Do we believe it or don't we? Do we believe that big corporations like Amazon should be able to exploit? I go back to my grandmother and I think about the families that those jobs supported. A lot of the women who worked in that industry that I was exposed to while my grandmother worked there were mostly single parents. They were making ends meet on a retail job. They had good health insurance. They had solid sick days, solid vacation time. They had a defined benefit retirement plan, a defined benefit plan that my grandmother, who retired in 1985, collected until she died in 2016. You're talking 31 years of retirement. And every month that defined benefit check was in the mail. Every month until she passed, giving her that bit of retirement security, that she didn't have to move in with the kids or she didn't have to go to a nursing home, that she lived in her home and didn't want for anything because she worked hard, she played by the rules, and they got ahead. She had Social Security, she had the defined benefit pension, and she had some savings. The three-legged stool that right now we've burned. We've totally burnt down so that we could give more tax cuts to the very wealthy. So for me, the conversation out of this, whether you agree with the policy or you don't, is that what we need is a working class to get a raise. Because for 30 years, we've seen stagnant and declining wages. In fact, I was just telling a guy today that, when I started in the trucking industry, late 80s, early 90s, started off $14 an hour. If you worked enough hours as a casual, you got health care, you got a pension, you got a pension credit. Once you got on the list, you got to be full-time. That top rate after a period of time went up to 18 and some change, like 1860, 70, somewhere up there. Today, that exact same job, $14 an hour, no health care, no pension, top marginal rate of 1850. Health care worse, pension worse. So over a 30-year period, the wages for that job went backward. And it's just not the trucking industry. It's just not one industry that this is happening to. It's happening across industries that used to have really good high union density, where workers had the ability to sit down across from the boss and go, okay, open the books. How much did you make last year? Can you imagine sitting down across the table from Jeff Bezos and having him say, I'm sorry, we can't give you a nickel raise because I can't think of a reason. Can you imagine that conversation going, really? You, the guy worth $155 billion, you can't give your workers a nickel an hour raise or a dime or a quarter. Really? You're going to make that argument? That's what used to happen. These CEOs would have to sit down with their workforce and justify their salary, which is why back in the 60s, CEOs only made 20 times what the average worker made, as where today it's like 300 times. The reason that it's 300 times, because they don't have to sit across the table from anybody. They're completely insulated and entitled. They believe that it's theirs. They built this. They're the producers. And all those workers are just, they're just the parasites. It's really backwards. It's really crazy, but it is exactly what it is. And it's infuriating. You know, I go back and I think about, you know, my grandparents' generation. They could get by on one income. And my grandmother didn't go to work until their children were in high school. It was like, hey, I need something to do, extra money. Yay. That was society back then. You could get by on one income. And that one income had family health care benefits. You know what's amazing to me is, you know, one of the places that I worked part-time, I was looking at their health care benefits. And the company would pay the health care benefits for the employee. If you wanted your spouse added, it was like $200 a week. If you wanted your kids added, it was like $600 a week. I mean, it was just completely outrageous. To where by the end of it, what you were paying for a family plan for healthcare was like $24,000. And it's outrageous, which is why most of the people who worked at that place, they covered themselves, and then their kids got chipped from the state because they had to ask for handouts from the government to help cover their children, instead of the employer being where you get your benefits. And I'll tell you, if we made a law saying that, like Richard Nixon wanted to do, that employers had to provide health care benefits, not just for the employee, but for their families, you want to see how fast the employer class in this country would be pushing for single-payer health care? It would be so fast your head would spin. But look, I'm in favor of having the conversation around Kana's idea. We need to make employers pay their workers a decent wage, allow their workers to share in the profits and the wealth that their work creates, and go back to that American ideal of, if you work hard, you play by the rules, you get ahead. That work should be rewarded and valued. That's simple to me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
When the kids are united, they can never be defined as yesterday. There's a brand new show today.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. This broadcast is on holiday until September 10th, but instead of airing reruns, we've asked some go-to foreign policy experts what they'll be paying attention to in the weeks to come. Jonah Blank is a senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation and has been watching as Pakistan's brand new prime minister tries to find his feet.
His name is Imran Khan, and he is quite a celebrity in his own right. He is Pakistan's most famous athlete. He led Pakistan's cricket team back in the early 1990s to its most important victory in cricket history over the colonial master of Britain. He is essentially Pakistan's version of Michael Jordan. However, after spending 20 years as the habitué of nightclubs in London and Biarritz, perhaps, and other hot spots in Europe, he has rebranded himself as an austere and pious champion of religion and of virtue in public life.
Even if that's not a sincere instance of seeing the light, Blank says it's good Pakistan now has a third consecutive civilian prime minister and another peaceful transition of power. But there are signs that with Imran Khan, as with his predecessors, Pakistan's military isn't far out of the frame. Luke Fargus, The United Nations.
The military had a very heavy hand in his election. From a U.S. perspective, it's bad because so many of the difficulties of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship are directly attributable to the role of the Pakistani military in Pakistani society. After all, let's remember, where was Osama bin Laden found hiding? In Abbottabad, right next door to Pakistan's version of West Point.
Luke Fargus, The United Nations.
So today, remember Roy Moore? Remember him? Former Alabama Chief Justice of their Supreme Court. Remember him? The guy with the one of the 10 Commandments everywhere. Remember him? The guy who was evidently chasing teenage girls while he was in his 30s. Remember him? Lost the Senate race to Doug Jones down in Alabama. Yeah, him. Evidently, he is suing comedian Sacha Baron Cohen for $95 million. Why not just say a gazillion? Why not just, come up, do the Austin Powers thing, come up with a gazillion dollars. They've harmed me. Evidently. And this is one of those moments where you go, dummy, you went on the show. You had to know what was going on. Evidently, Sacha Baron Cohen had him on his Showtime show, where he had Roy Moore, I guess, unwittingly submit to a test to determine if he was a pedophile. And on the show, Cohen determined that, in fact, Roy Moore failed the test and therefore is a pedophile. Look, it is what it is. Evidently, the joke, obviously played off the accusations from the campaign. But he's saying that, he's now been harmed. The sketch has defamed him, and he is feeling emotional stress. And evidently his wife is being emotionally distressed as well. And I'm going, really? A comedy show that, not a lot of people, because I haven't actually seen many of the clips. I don't have Showtime. So I'm going, really? After all of the abuse you took on the campaign trail, you and your little gun with the cowboy hat, with the pedophile suit on. I mean, it's a beautiful picture. Him in the little, cowboy outfit, like when you were a little kid and your mother dressed you up for Halloween as a cowboy and gave you the little pea shooter, silver pea shooter guns. That's what he looked like. Only he's a grown man. When I first saw the picture, the first thing obviously is, wow, what a small gun you have. And the second thing is, wow, pedophile. Why is this guy anywhere near Senate? Why is he near the Supreme Court of Alabama and not at the defendant's table? So there you go, $95 million. $95 million. I like the gazillion. Go for the gold, man. Go for the gold. Also, there is some talk about who's going to replace Don McGahn, who's McGone. The name that they have floated to replace him, a guy named Emmett Flood. You may remember Emmett Flood from the Clinton years. He was one of Clinton's, impeachment specialist attorneys, I guess. Evidently, the Trump has floated his idea, probably because he is viewed as the impeachment specialist. You got to think, especially after the major distraction of the op-ed. And I got to question the timing of the op-ed. I really do. Today, that dropped today on the second day of Kavanaugh's testimony, because, that's what all of the people I know were talking about. It sucked a lot of the oxygen out of the Kavanaugh room. And I got to wonder if maybe it was Trump who wrote the damn thing. Maybe he wants out. Maybe he wants to get thrown out. There's an interesting idea. Maybe it was the Trumpster. Maybe. And finally this hour, Spirit Air, their customer service agents, and good for them, voted overwhelmingly to join the Transport Workers Union, TWU. 82% of them voted. And evidently, the company didn't even show up to see the ballots counted because they knew they were in deep. Now, this to me is what has to happen in every workplace across this country. You want better wages, you want better hours, you want better working conditions, you want dignity, you want respect, you want a voice, you want opportunity. That's what you do. Pretty simple stuff to me. So good on the customer service agents there at Spirit Air for deciding, you know what? We're joining. Good for you guys. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of the program thus far, thericksmithshow.com is where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Kavanaugh. How'd the hearings go today? What did he lie about? What didn't he answer? What did he dodge? All of that. Right back.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
It's practically unanimous. 9 out of 10 establishment economists agree that America's solid job growth and low unemployment rate truly make ours the land of opportunity. So why, they wonder aloud, is the state of labor today so morose? Well, start with all those jobs. Quantity is one thing, but quality is what really matters. As Jesse Jackson has pointed out, even slaves had jobs. While not in slavery, millions of Americans today, from Walmart employees to school teachers, are paid so little that they have to patch together 2 or 3 jobs each to eke out a bare-bones living. In fact, major corporations have made poverty pay central to their profit strategy, with giants like Amazon, McDonald's, and Walmart issuing such puny paychecks that their workers have to rely on food stamps and other public programs to make ends meet. That's a corporate subsidy of roughly $150 billion a year taken from us taxpayers. Miserly pay, however, is only one cause of the stunning fact that more than half of American workers now say that they're looking to leave their current jobs. The deeper issue is the overall lack of respect for workaday people. After all, workers can see in their daily job experiences that the powers that be, from corporate chieftains to political leaders, consider employees to be a cost to be cut, not an asset to advance. Working stiffs see the continued offshoring of their jobs and deliberate decimation of their rights and union bargaining power. They see leaders of both political parties go whoring for corporate dollars while rigging the rules to gut everything from overtime pay to health care. And they see the power elite rushing to a robot economy that will leave them and their children out in the cold. This is Jim Hightower saying it's not just labor that's under attack, it's the middle class. More than a Labor Day, America needs an all-out labor rebellion.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
Yeah, sanity. Can you imagine Trump bouncing off the walls as we speak? And look, this anonymous op-ed, I think it has done a masterful job of diverting, of deflecting, of changing the topic of just how bad Brett Kavanaugh is going to be on the Supreme Court if it's allowed to happen. And look, I look at the back and forth that Kavanaugh had with Leahy. Senator Leahy from Vermont, who asked him, hey, Trump claims he has an absolute right to pardon himself. Does he? And what you got was dodgeball. You got Kavanaugh saying, well, the question of self-pardons is something I've never analyzed. I don't know. It's hypothetical. The major dodge. To where Leahy says, well, and the other half of that, the obvious one, does a president have the ability to pardon someone in exchange for a promise from that person they wouldn't testify against him? And, well, I guess Kavanaugh took a little offensive by that, because I guess the finger was pointed at him. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on today's hearing, maybe share some ideas on how we stop this atrocity, I've asked Winnie Wong to come talk with us. She is a senior advisor with the Women's March. Winnie, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me on the show, Rick.
So what do we think of today? What did you think of the Democrats' performance on this day?
I mean, I think that, there are some senators who are doing a better job than others. And, most of the senators who are on the Judiciary Committee are doing their diligence and asking some very, tricky questions that are causing Judge Kavanaugh to look like who he is. So that has been good. But in general, I feel dismayed at the Democratic Party leadership in terms of how they're handling.
What would you have them do?
I mean, look, they could have done what Sessions did during the Kagan confirmations, and they could have actually said, look, we're not going to do this. Chuck Schumer has a lot of power, and he could easily say, we're going to not, we're going to adjourn this until we actually have enough time to examine the documents that have not yet been presented.
Right.
So,
but do they have the power to do that, though?
I mean, I in terms of what? In terms of process, or?
Yeah, I mean, you said they were going to adjourn until the. Do they have the power to do that? I mean, wouldn't the Republicans just steamroll through?
I mean, the Republicans could steamroll through, but I think that Senator Schumer could instruct his fellow Democrats to not show up. I mean, that's within their right.
Right.
So, I mean, that's an action. That's about exercising their right. So, I mean, that's something he could do.
Or maybe hold a hearing with a cardboard cutout, because to be honest, that's the kind of answers you're going to get anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the procedure is like pretty wonky, and I think that for a lot of the protesters who are like the content of the hearing is pretty wonky, and so for a lot of protesters who may or may not be interested in like examining the wonk, it's it's not. I don't want to use the word confusing, but it is like it's an extra layer of like this is just not transparent because there's so much missing that it's very difficult for like the senators inside the hearing to actually like give them a line of questioning that presents like a very cohesive picture of like who this person is.
Yeah, I mean, and the fact that we don't have a full, complete record of this guy's, his past, I think is important. That all the documents haven't been examined. And look, even conservatives have to be able to say that we want to make sure there's a full vetting process. That we want to make sure that we know who this guy is, because he's not going to answer any real questions. So we have to be able to look at his record, and he has an extensive record.
He has an extensive record, yeah. I mean, and I think that like, for legal scholars and for people who studied, judicial opinions, he has a track record that presents him to be the type of person who consistently sides with corporations. I mean, this is not. It's. I say that it's not rocket science, but it sort of is, because again, people don't read. They don't read judicial opinions for fun.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, I do sometimes.
I try.
I do sometimes. I mean, yeah, and so it's not really. But like, look, like yeah. I mean, it's a lifetime appointment, and there's a lot at stake, and for the people who have traveled to D.C. this week to protest and dissent, it means a lot, I think, to them, and also really to other people who may not really understand like why it's so important. So I'm really proud to be in community with these folks.
No, and it's fantastic that people are doing it. I think it's really important that the message be shown that this guy is not somebody we want on the court. And as I've been saying, putting him on the court is kind of, saying, hey, we're just going to repeal the entire 20th century.
Well, I mean, like he couldn't do it himself. I mean, he would have to, it would have to be a majority.
No, he's the fifth vote. He's the decider guy at this point. He's just to the left of, according to the last thing that I saw, just to the left of Clarence Thomas. So, kiss Roe goodbye. Would argue Griswold might even be on the table if they get around to it. Kiss any consumer rights goodbye, any workers' rights goodbye. All of that stuff's out the window now with 5 super conservative members on the court.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to workers' rights, I'm particularly alarmed, by his views. I mean, this is a person who, if you remember you may or may not remember, but in the sort of SeaWorld Blackfish case,
yep,
where a SeaWorld employee was mauled to death by a killer whale, he ruled in favor of SeaWorld and against OSHA. So it shows very clearly that he doesn't particularly favor regulatory agencies being given, the type of power that they need really to protect workers, and really favors like the interest of corporations. It's very alarming. I mean, there's a great documentary that you could find on CNN. I think CNN bought the documentary. It's called Blackfish, and it's really very good. I recommend it if you haven't seen it.
No, I absolutely have to take a look at that. But one of the things that's been frustrating me for a number of years is, I've feared for a while that we're heading back to the days of the Lochner era. We're heading back to this idea of liberty of contract, that if you're desperate enough to work for poverty wages and deplorable conditions and you get harmed, well, that was your fault. You're on your own because, hey, you made the choice. And having a government, having a court system that enforces that again, that's very concerning to me, because I saw how it worked out the last time and it wasn't good.
Well, I mean, I think that, the silver lining here is that more people are engaging in the process of democracy than ever before. So I think that's good, whether that's like engaging in a form of protest by participating in civil disobedience or engaging in a act of democracy by voting at the ballot box.
Well, let's hope they vote.
Well, right. I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think that if you're paying attention right now, you're seeing that actually progressives are winning up and down the ticket. And, if he is confirmed and the court becomes a conservative court, then what we have to do is win 75 seats in the Senate and take back the House and continue our quest toward electing progressive governors, because governors are a bulwark in this time. So I mean, that's really what it is. It's actually about having the long view and thinking about what the offense is, the strategy is to protect ourselves against 5 conservative justices.
No, it's a great hope. 75 senators. Has there ever been one party who had 75 senators?
No, but I mean, we can hope, right? I think we have to strive for that. And I think if progressives manage to, I don't want to say overtake the party, but move the Democratic Party left and expand the electorate, I think we have a good shot of doing so. I mean, we just have to remember that not all voters are registered Democrats or Republicans. There are a lot of independent voters in this country. And there are a lot of young people. And if you start thinking ahead to 2020, you then begin to realize that in 2020, 85 million voters will come of age, will be eligible to vote, representing the largest voter bloc in history. So if we're able to engage young people to vote on progressive values, I feel hopeful that it will not be people are so desperate that they will work for slave wages, or that they'll bring back debtors' jails. Of course, they already have that in some states.
Sure.
But again, it's about understanding where we have to, take back the power. And Arizona is a fine example of that. I mean, I don't think 10 years ago, when we saw the rise of like Jan Brewer and SB 1070, that I could ever imagine that in 2018 David Garcia would win the nomination for governor. So it's good. I mean, there's stuff happening.
Yeah, I know that is good but it's always been my belief that things only happen out of desperation. When there's great pain and suffering, then things change. And my fear is that you put someone like Kavanaugh on the court, and we end up with a lot of pain and a lot of desperation and a lot of turmoil. And out of that maybe comes that sense of solidarity where we start doing some of the things that you're talking about.
Well, Rick, I hate to say this, but there is a lot of pain and there is a lot of suffering and there is a lot of desperation already. This isn't new. This has been, been 'twas ever thus. This is not, 40 million Americans live well below the poverty line, right? Like, Black and brown children are being gunned down in the streets. It isn't good. People are working longer hours for less. They are working 2 and 3 and 4 jobs with no access even to adequate healthcare or social services. They can't afford to pay their rent. They're struggling to make ends meet and put food on the table. It should never be a situation where you have to choose between filling up your gas tank or buying a loaf of bread. And that's the reality for many, many Americans. And so I just don't think that yes, we can say that it'll get worse, but it's been bad for a very long time for many Americans.
No, I absolutely agree with you. But I look at this nominee, and virtually everything that you've laid out, I view him making worse.
Well, I mean, it would be a process, right? It would have to be a process, and we'd have to continue to show up to make sure that he doesn't make it worse, because he alone cannot achieve all of those things. It's not as if Brett Kavanaugh will, find himself on the job, day one on the job and immediately start rolling back row. It would be a process.
No, and I would argue that probably the case to do that is already in the works.
I would think that, yes. I think that conservatives have been waiting for this moment for a long time, and I think that they have an apparatus in place, and they will move very quickly. But I think that we will also have to move very quickly, and that means that after we win the House in November, which I feel confident we will do, as well as elect some truly progressive governors, we have to, continue to move forward with our plans for 2019, where we will have to elect progressive mayors. There are a number of mayoral races that are really important in 19, as well as legislative races. And then get ready for 2020, where the real showdown begins.
Yeah,
it's going to be a showdown in 2020.
Well, no, absolutely. But I argue this one. This is the most important one. If you lose this one, I forget the rest. I'm of the mindset you lose this one, pack it in.
I mean, as an activist, Rick, I can't say that. We've lost a lot and we've won some, but it's not really in my language. I'm not speaking on behalf of other people who are in this fight, but it's not really in my language. I mean, if I'm able to do this and to continue to organize people to take back our democracy, I'm going to do that. I'm not going to pack anything in. I'm going to move to Maine and replace Susan Collins. This is not, we have people in this movement who are very dedicated and very savvy and very good at what they do, and we just have to keep going. We know that in 2020, Susan Collins is not likely to run for re-election, and that opens up an opportunity for us to make sure that seat is held by a Democrat. So there are plans underway to do that, right? We can do the same in Alaska. We should start thinking about Iowa and New Mexico. There's a lot of opportunity in 2019 and 2020. So, I mean, you can say pack it in, but that's not what I'm going to do. And if you are packing it in, then I hope you find a nice place to relocate to.
No, the reason I say this is, look, this election, If because there could be another Supreme Court justice coming down the road at some point.
Sure.
There could be a whole bunch of bad policy coming down the road. Look, if you look at what Trump's been saying lately, very authoritarian-minded, and with a Supreme Court that would probably be in line with it. If you don't get subpoena power now, if you don't begin to hold some committees to investigate and hold people accountable now, I worry 2 years down the road. I worry 2 years down the road doesn't happen.
Well, I mean, I think that the procedure begins when the House wins, right? Like, if there is any type of movement to be had. I mean, if like the special counsel decides to take any type of action, they are likely to not do so until after the House is taken or captured by Democrats. I mean, I don't think that's. I mean, that's the procedure. They can't do anything unless there's a majority House. So I don't think that the council is not going to subpoena Trump to testify. I think likely that will happen. Like, are we trying to have that conversation? We can have that conversation. I think he'll do that at some point after the midterms. And I think that Trump is scrambling to, get this justice confirmed. But again, there's so many different forces at play right now that it's not entirely clear to anybody what will happen. But I think that we can safely say that we will win the House in November, and at some point the special counsel will subpoena him, and he will have to testify, and then he'll tell 10 lies in 4 minutes, and then other things will be able to move into motion.
That is the hope anyway, and the hope is.
Yeah, well, he has to testify first, then he has to tell 12 lies in 5 minutes, which he's definitely going to do. And they've
he can't help himself. Come on.
Yeah, he can't help himself. He has an impulse control problem, and so he will do that. And then we'll see what happens. I think it'll be really interesting to watch it all sort of play out in real time, over the holidays. Sort of depressing.
Yeah, I've said they should put it on pay-per-view. Maybe we could solve some of our national debt problems.
Well, maybe you should do a thing on your radio show where you put it on pay-per-view. I don't know. I'm sure that you could figure out something. I don't know.
There you go. Last question I've got for you, because obviously the big distraction today was the op-ed. I wanted to get your thoughts on it. Propaganda? Is there somebody really inside, or did Trump or Mike Pence write it?
I have not. I've been in the Capitol all day organizing protesters, and then also kind of jumping in and out of the hearing room myself. And I only just got back to my hotel room, and I just read the op-ed about 2 hours ago while enjoying my first meal of the day. And I have not quite formed an opinion yet as to what I think this might be. I tend to think that it is not. That it is. I don't want to believe in conspiracy theories. And so I can't imagine that that Pence is actually devious enough or even smart enough to have come up with anything.
See, that seems to be Congressman Khanna said that earlier. That seems to be the general consensus around.
Yeah,
maybe Mother wrote it.
Put it this way: if Mike Pence could be the vice president, then Rick Smith should definitely think about running for office, right? Because that guy cut his teeth in your profession. You know this. He was a drive time.
Yeah.
I was in college, in grad school. when that was happening, and then all of a sudden, fast forward, into 2018, and he's our vice president. That's what we have. This is what it is.
Scary, crazy times.
It is scary, crazy times. But listen, you know what? As Bernie Sanders says, the struggle.
Absolutely. Winnie, I appreciate the time. Hope you'll come back and talk to us again. Keep us up to date on what you guys are doing.
Sure. Yeah. Reach out anytime, and I'll come have a chat.
Beautiful. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Rick. Bye.
Good stuff. Winnie Wong. She's the senior advisor there with the Women's March. And I hope November there's another big Women's March, and they march right to the polls and throw the bums out. Just a good thought. Quick break. Right back.
This is why we fight, why we lie awake. This is why we fight.
for the rest of us. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1882. That was the day the first Labor Day parade took place in New York City. But whose idea was it? According to the late Jonathan Grossman, former historian at the Department of Labor, the first Labor Day occurred during a general uptick in working class organizing, strike activity, and militancy that year. Peter McGuire, Carpenters Union General Secretary, is often credited as the father of Labor Day, but others assert that Knights of Labor machinist and New York City's Central Labor Union leader Matthew McGuire was the force behind the holiday. The machinist McGuire had been active in the 8-hour movement and later as a Socialist Labor Party politician. By the end of the decade, 400 cities nationwide celebrated the first Monday of September as, quote, a general holiday for the working man. It was already an official holiday in most states when the labor movement started campaigning for a day of recognition at the federal level. Labor militants contend that by 1894, the holiday was promoted for its respectability against the more radical May Day. Another unanswered question remains regarding President Cleveland's motives for signing the federal legislation. The widely accepted view is that Cleveland hoped to win back labor's vote after federal troops crushed the 1894 Pullman strike in early August. But the president signed the legislation much earlier on June 28th. The nationwide boycott against Pullman cars, called by Eugene V. Debs and the American Railway Union, had just begun 2 days earlier. Did he hope to deflate the boycott? What do you think? For many in the Chicago labor movement, the fact that both Labor Day and May Day are linked to the city's history is a source of pride. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Couple of quick emails on the pack it in comment. Not well received. But look, here's my take on it. There's so much energy, so much hope for the 2018 election, and this is where I'm concerned about voter theft. I'm concerned about hacking of our system. I'm truly concerned that they figure out how to rig it in a way that Democrats pick up a couple of seats, but not a lot, and not enough to have real control. Because you can still have a couple of conservative Democrats who are going to maybe not so much allow things to happen. So my concern is that there's all of this energy and all of this push and all of this want and this fight to take back the House and to hold people accountable, that if it doesn't happen, that you then have that kind of frustration where people throw up their hands and go, I'm out. And they go back to their lives. And they figure out how to exist in the new world. Figure out what the new normal is. And that's a real concern for me. And look, I understand people, activists. I would consider myself an activist as well. I understand that you never give up, you never quit, you always fight, and you pick the next battles, and you fight the next battles, and you constantly push and do all of that. But there's a moment where you go, reality, if we don't see a blue wave, my fear is that you lose a lot of people. Now, there's also the other part that could happen, that if the blue wave doesn't happen, you get people much more engaged and much more militant. Maybe you drop off some people, but you keep the really militant ones. Like the ones who were arrested yesterday. And the ones who will probably be arrested tomorrow. As I understand, they didn't allow a lot of people in. They didn't allow public people into the hearing room for a while, so they couldn't be arrested, I guess. But as I said, I'm really concerned about this nomination, because this is that one. This is the scary one to me. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, Adita Kenner is going to be here to share some of her thoughts on today's hearing and give us some insight of maybe how it's going to affect people in Pennsylvania, where I'm at, Scary, scary times. Telling you. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show.
7, yeah, and I'll go to work at night. I got no time for living, yes, I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Torrential rain has been relentless for nearly 5 days, dousing the Big Island with more than 51 inches.
Hawaii dodges a direct hit from record-breaking Hurricane Lane, but receives a warning about global warming. Australia's Conservative Prime Minister ousted over climate policies. Plus,
facts of global warming demand our urgent attention, especially in Washington.
The complicated climate legacy of Senator John McCain.
All of those complications and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
In the years ahead, we're likely to see reduced water supplies, more forest fires, changes in crop production, more heat waves, and a greater intensity in storms.
Wow, John McCain, 10 years ago. Too bad his colleagues didn't pay attention. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I think we have good news, sort of, concerning Hurricane Lane and Hawaii.
Well, it's good news and maybe a little bad news as well. Hawaii did dodge a direct hit over the weekend from now Tropical Storm Lane, which is now tracking back out to sea after skirting the islands and dumping historic levels of rain that triggered widespread flooding across the island chain. Many high water rescues, but thankfully no reported deaths. Lane delivered more than 51 inches of rain. That is more than 4 feet, catapulting it into the record books as the third highest rainfall total for a tropical storm or hurricane in the United States since record keeping began nearly 70 years ago.
Wow.
And it hit 1 year to the day after Hurricane Harvey broke the all-time high rainfall record for the U.S.
Well, the hits keep on coming.
Yes, having 2 of the top 3 all-time most extreme rainstorms from hurricanes occurring in just the past 2 years is consistent with what scientists expect from a warming climate. Hurricane Lane also brought a warning for Hawaii. Lane was only the second Category 5 storm in recorded history to pass so near to the state, but a recent study from MIT and the University of Colorado Boulder projects that due to global warming increasing ocean temperatures, the most intense tropical storms near Hawaii are now predicted to increase in frequency by about 15% per decade. But the researchers also said, quote, "We can cut that increase roughly in half by reducing our fossil fuel emissions."
But as long as we don't reduce our fossil fuel emissions, the oceans will continue to warm, these storms will continue to get more frequent, and, most notably, more intense.
Indeed they will. Reducing emissions will not be happening anytime soon in Australia.
Sorry, mate.
That's the world's biggest coal exporter. Conservative Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull was ousted from office on Friday by his right-wing climate science denier members of his own party after he attempted to set modest targets for reducing the nation's carbon emissions.
Well, that'll teach him.
Former Liberal Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, in a scathing editorial in the Sydney Morning Herald, however, also blamed Australian media, specifically Rupert Murdoch, owner of Sky News in the UK and Australia and Fox News Channel here in the US. He accused Rupert Murdoch of using his control of Australian media to drum Turnbull out of office and block any action on climate change, calling Murdoch, quote, "a cancer eating at the heart of Australian democracy."
So it's not just Americans being played for suckers by Rupert Murdoch.
Nope. Australia is also fighting an outbreak of winter wildfires, and the province of New South Wales, which supplies a quarter of Australia's agricultural output, is officially in 100% drought amid the deepest drought in more than 50 years.
So all of these things, worsening storms, worsening wildfires, worsening droughts, were all things that John McCain, the 2008 Republican presidential candidate, warned us about 10 years ago before forgetting all about it.
Exactly. That brings us to Republican Senator John McCain of Arizona, who passed away over the weekend. Whatever you think of his complicated legacy, we just want to note for the record that Senator McCain was the last Republican leader to push for U.S. action on climate change. In 2003 and 2005, McCain sponsored groundbreaking national cap-and-trade legislation. In 2008, as the Republican presidential nominee, McCain laid out a detailed cap-and-trade policy to curb carbon emissions and fight climate change.
Facts of global warming demand our urgent attention, especially in Washington. Good stewardship, prudence, and simple common sense demand that we act to meet the challenge and act quickly.
However, after he lost the 2008 election to President Barack Obama, McCain abandoned his climate leadership role and in 2010 refused to support new cap-and-trade climate legislation in the Senate. So, literally, 2008 was the last time the Republican Party supported any real action to curb climate change.
Even John McCain's vice presidential nominee, Sarah Palin, wanted to do something about climate change as well.
How quickly things change.
Those were the days. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Those were the days, my friend. We thought they'd never end. We'd sing and dance forever and a day.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
He's going the distance. He's going for speed. She's all alone.
So I'm reading Patrick Leahy's Twitter feed, and he's saying that evidently the questions he was preparing to ask Brett Kavanaugh were hacked by Republican staffers and given to Kavanaugh. Is that is that how we do things now? Wow. In fact, he's saying this scandal amounted to a digital Watergate. Wow. And look, this nomination is that important to the right wing. This nomination is that important to Republicans. This is the key to repealing the entire 20th century. This is going after Social Security and Medicare and minimum wage laws and maximum hour laws and you name it, the New Deal done if this guy gets onto the court. And Roe versus Wade done, consumer protections done, all down the list. I'm here to share some thoughts on today's testimony on the fun and games that we saw. I've asked Khadija Kenner to come talk with us. She's campaign director with Why Courts Matter PA. Khadija, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me on the show today, Rick. I really appreciate it.
So what'd you think of the performance today by Kavanaugh, the dodgeball game that we saw?
Yeah, there was a lot of dodging, a lot of deflecting, and a lot of concealing information. So we didn't really learn anything new about Brett Kavanaugh today. Not really.
Yeah, but I don't think we need his words. I mean, you look at his record. I mean, his record is horrible.
Yeah, and he was selected because of his record. You know, I don't have to keep repeating this information. We all know this. He's part of that corrupted bargain, that list of 25. He was already vetted. Federalist Society, Heritage Foundation approved. They knew exactly who they were getting when they told Donald Trump to nominate him.
So, I brought up Patrick Leahy, who I thought asked a very, very reasonable question about his loyalties and about the idea that, a sitting president shouldn't, his views on a sitting president pardoning himself or others who might testify against him. And what you got was, a dodge and then a snide comment.
Yeah, and almost more telling are some of the comments that he had made to Senator Coons when he was asking the same kind of questions about his position on presidential power and what he would do in regards to a sitting president being investigated and possibly being indicted. And so I think Judge Kavanaugh's record clearly just lets us all know that he believes the president should be immune to criminal investigation and he's above the law.
I look at this and then you go, is this just a really bad 1980s kind of movie that someone, just scripted for us? I mean, because it seems like all the horrible is in one big ball.
it's almost like we're being punked. I'm still waiting for
exactly
Ashton Kutcher to jump out and let us know that this is all over. Yeah, this is it's unbelievable. I mean, the happenings of today, there's just so much. I stepped away from my computer and my phone for about 3 hours, and I came back to lots of news today. And so it's never ending. There's always something.
No. And then the big distraction, the anonymous op-ed, which I think has been a huge distraction. And I got to wonder the timing of it, if that wasn't somewhat planned to take some of the heat off of Kavanaugh. Because look, the polling numbers on his likability or of approval, if you will, not very good. He's down there with Robert Bork.
Exactly, Kavanaugh. He's polling very poorly. I mean, he's polling very poorly with women, especially. As we know, he's absolutely going to get in the way of Roe v. Wade. He would be that deciding 5-4 vote if it comes down to it. His polling is there with Robert Bork, and we stopped Robert Bork, so there's still light at the end of this tunnel. Maybe we can stop Kavanaugh as well.
Yeah, is there a path for that? Because look, my fear is that he's sly enough. He's a good enough wordsmith that he's going to be able to play dodgeball with them, and they're not going to catch him, saying anything. That there will be no sound bites, and that the Republicans ram him through, and we now are saddled with a guy with a lifetime appointment who will be horrible for women's rights and workers' rights, and go down the list, privacy, and the police state will be great again, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it is concerning. We always thought, if we can just stop the ladies, the Republican women in the Senate, and maybe if we can flip them and they would vote the right way because supposedly they believe in Roe v. Wade. But it just seems as though we can't hold out any hope that it's going to be Murkowski or, anyone that's going to flip on that side at this point. I think the decision was made. A lot of these folks got put in office because of the importance of the federal courts and the Supreme Court in particular. And they are doing what they were put in office to do, and that is make this court much more conservative and try to get rid of Roe v. Wade. And what's kind of scary to me is not only just the Supreme Court, but the lower courts as well, and the fact that we have lower court nominees who will not say out loud that Brown versus Board of Education was rightly decided. So there was people put in place to do a certain job, and they're doing it.
Yeah,
so we're gonna do our best to try to stop it, but who knows?
No, I mean that's all you could do at this point. But I talked about this the other night, that what we're seeing right in front of us is the culmination of like 40 years, 50 years worth of conservative work and infrastructure and investment in moving the courts in this direction. And I pointed out the quote from Paul Weyrich, one of the co-founders of the Heritage Foundation, who back in 1980 said, do we want everyone to vote? He goes, I don't want everybody to vote. Our leverage goes up as the voting populace goes down. And what you've seen from that point forward is every opportunity to put roadblocks in front of people and their ability to vote, and have politicians who blocked at every opportunity Bill Clinton and Barack Obama from putting people on the federal bench.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I talk about this all the time, and, we all know elections have consequences, and that's why they make it so difficult for folks to vote. And that I just got back to Pennsylvania. I was living in North Carolina for a few years, and that was the epitome of trying to stop particularly the black vote there. You had a former governor, Pat McCrory, who tried with almost surgical precision to try to stop the black vote, going to the Board of Elections and asking particularly, how do black people vote? And so we're in times now where this is what it is. They want to stop the voting because they know they can't win these popular elections. And so they're making it very difficult for the average American to go ahead and cast that ballot.
Yeah, and I look at someone like Kavanaugh. What's his record on voting accessibility? What's his record on because look, Chris Kobach out in Kansas, they're investigating him now. It could be that a sitting governor could be charged with voter fraud. And there's a whole bunch of possibilities of how bad things go. And to have a judiciary that, you saw the Trump tweet the other day of him saying about Jeff Sessions that, basically that Sessions shouldn't have, enforced the law against these two congressmen because, politically it hurt us. That's the mindset in enforcing our rules and our laws in this country.
Yeah, and you don't have to look any further than what happened today when you had Senator Cory Booker questioning Brett Kavanaugh. And then in addition to that, we had Reverend Dr. Donald Moore published an op-ed in the Inquirer, it's published in Philadelphia Inquirer, talking about Brett Kavanaugh and how he'll be an enormous step back in areas for African Americans. You know, we have this on record. We have Kavanaugh's record and how he has ruled in the 12 years he's been on the courts. And what's particularly troubling is how he voted in a 2012 ruling when it comes to affirming South Carolina's racist voter identification law. And so we don't have to assume what Brett Kavanaugh will do. We have 12 years of his record, and we can look to that to see exactly what he'll do when he gets on the Supreme Court, if he gets on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, but Khadija, he's just an umpire. He believes in the rule of law. He's just going to call balls and strikes like John Roberts. He believes in precedent.
Yeah, settled law is only settled law until it's not.
Right.
So that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, I is there a way to stop this? I mean, you spend time working on this. You know, look, I had just a glimmer of hope that Susan Collins would grow a brain and that Lisa Murkowski would actually have a spine on this. And I'm struggling because I don't know if, especially Susan Collins, I don't know if she's gullible, naive, or just plain stupid, or the other side of it doesn't really give a rat's behind about Roe versus Wade, and it's all just political pandering. I haven't decided where I'm at on that.
I really believe some folks don't think that Roe v. Wade could ever be overturned. I just don't think that they believe it would ever happen. And so they're kind of stuck in that mentality, Collins and Murkowski, that, you know, it'll never go away. There will never be a judge that can take that 5-4 vote and swing it against the other direction. And so I think just like you're saying, they're just hopeful that it will never happen. And so they're not even doing anything to be proactive about making sure it stops.
I wish I could be that hopeful. I mean, I do, because, you know, I said about 10 years ago that, you know, the conservatives, you know, during the Bush years, in fact, you know, I was saying, look, you know, actually it was during the Justice Sunday with Alito. Remember Justice Sunday?
Yeah, with Alito.
Yeah, I remember how crazy that was, where they linked up all like 1,000 churches into their little cabal. But I remember saying back then that, you know, not only do they want Roe, they want to go back to Griswold, take birth control away. No, you married couples, you must procreate and go forth and have a quiver full.
And that's why these handmade costumes that you see around the Capitol the last few days are so perfect, because this is kind of where we're going with this. I thought it was a very important question that was asked this evening by Senator Kamala Harris. And she asked Brett Kavanaugh, is there anything that's being done right now when it comes to men? Are there any laws on the books that stop men from doing anything reproductively? And, of course, there's a no answer to that. But we're sure to regulate the bodies of women, but there's no regulation on men's bodies.
No, I'm sure that's coming. Look, when the crazy religious zealots take over, it'll come down the road. I mean, that's coming eventually, just not yet, because as I've been saying, you know, the goal first and foremost is, you know, gays back in the closet, blacks back in the fields, and women back in the kitchen, and that's where they want to take us.
I think that's what they're holding on to, or they're trying to hold on to. I mean, we all know the demographics of this country are changing. So if we were trying to make America great, I guess we're going back to the 50s. I don't know what time period we're trying to go back to at this point, really, not sure. But, yeah, I think there's just some folks that are just holding on to what they thought was a good time. And this country is growing, and this country is changing rapidly, and it is browning, and it's very scary to some. And they'll just have to get over it.
Yeah. So, any thoughts on how this plays out? Do you see a path towards stopping it? Do you see activists being able to move? Do you have any advice for people? What do you think?
We can't give up. I mean, here in Pennsylvania, we're dealing with two senators who are on two different paths when it comes to Brett Kavanaugh. We have Senator Casey, who has already made his determination from the beginning, before Kavanaugh was even named, that he would not be supporting anyone that came out of this corrupt bargain. But it's important to make phone calls to his office to let him know he is being supported. The fact that he has an election coming up in November is probably concerning to him. Maybe it's not. I mean, he's been very bold about where he stands. And then you have Senator Toomey, who's in office for, 5 years still. And so we feel as though we really can't change his mind. I personally received letters back from him that are the same form letters about how he's going to vote for this nominee. He's excited to vote for this nominee, but we can't stop making phone calls to his office as well, because I can tell you those in favor of Kavanaugh are making those phone calls. And so when it gets time for him to get on the floor and make that vote, you know, he can say he received a certain amount of phone calls in favor and a certain amount against. And if the ones against outweigh the ones that are for, then he should be voting the way his constituents tell him to vote and not how he personally believes.
No, I'm right there with you. Any predictions, or don't you get into that?
You know, I'm not under the impression that there's going to be a change in the mind of Senator Toomey and a lot of these other senators here that, you know, you wonder about what they could do. You know, what could a Jeff Flake do? What can the women Republicans do? You know, I'm not going to put all my eggs in that basket, but I know that I'm not going to stop the fight, and I'm not going to stop encouraging others to fight. I think it's so important that all of us make sure our voices are heard and we get out there and we say what needs to be said. And I'm just so thankful for those who have finally woken up to the process of what's going on and care about what happens on the courts. I mean, you said it earlier, you know, there's these far-right extremist groups that are very well funded. And I think that progressive groups need to do the same thing if they want to be in this for the long haul, because Republicans, they have a game plan. You know, they're playing chess to our checkers at this point. We need to step it up if we're going to compete and if we're going to have, you know, a list of nominees that we can put forward at a different time. It's just that we're not playing for the long haul. We're playing the short game, and we need to get invested in being around for the long haul.
No, I'm right there with you. And we need to take if this goes the wrong way, we need to take the energy and the anger from this and take it out on those standing for election come November. Just my thought.
Yeah, elections have consequences, so we need to see what happens in November if folks really will get out there and vote their values.
Good stuff. Khadija, I appreciate the thoughts. I wish you the best, and I keep up the fight.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. I'll be in D.C. tomorrow and Friday, and I'm hoping to make some noise in one of the hearings one of these days.
All right. Well, if you get arrested, give me a call.
Will do.
Thanks so much, Khadija Kenner, campaign director there at Why Courts Matter PA. We'll make sure we get a link out so you can check out their website. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
When the kids are united, they can never be defined as yesterday. There's a brand new show today.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1882. That was the day that the first Labor Day celebration and parade took place in New York City. The New York Sun printed a vivid report of the parade of 10,000 marching workers. The paper described, quote, men wearing regalia, men with society aprons, and men with flags, musical instruments, badges, and all the other paraphernalia of a procession. The article went on to say, quote, as far ahead as one could see, and as far down the side streets as forms and faces could be distinguished, the windows and roofs and even the lampposts and awning frames were occupied by persons anxious to get a good view of the first parade in New York of working men of all trades united in one organization. All along the line, cheers were sent up. The reporter described the colorful banners carried by each trade union and noted that following the bricklayers came, quote, 2 decorated wagons containing brick arches. On each side of one of the wagons were the inscriptions 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for recreation. And get on to it, the union will never surrender. From New York, the idea of setting aside a holiday for workers spread. Oregon became the first state to officially recognize the holiday in 1897. Colorado, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York established a Labor Day that year as well. By 1894, 23 more states celebrated the workers' holiday. It was that year that President Grover Cleveland declared it a national holiday in response to the Pullman strike and boycott that began in Chicago. Labor Day is the day to honor the sacrifices made by labor fighting for safe and fair workplaces. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. This broadcast is on holiday until September 10th, but instead of airing reruns, we've asked some go-to foreign policy experts what they'll be paying attention to in the weeks to come. Jonah Blank is a senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation and has been watching as Pakistan's brand new prime minister tries to find his feet.
His name is Imran Khan, and he is quite a celebrity in his own right. He is Pakistan's most famous athlete. He led Pakistan's cricket team back in the early 1990s to its most important victory in cricket history over the colonial master of Britain. He is essentially Pakistan's version of Michael Jordan. However, after spending 20 years as the habitué of nightclubs in London and Biarritz, perhaps, and other hot spots in Europe, he has rebranded himself as an austere and pious champion of religion and of virtue in public life.
Even if that's not a sincere instance of seeing the light, Blank says it's good Pakistan now has a third consecutive civilian prime minister and another peaceful transition of power. But there are signs that with Imran Khan, as with his predecessors, Pakistan's military isn't far out of the frame. Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
The military had a very heavy hand in his election. From a U.S. perspective, it's bad because so many of the difficulties of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship are directly attributable to the role of the Pakistani military in Pakistani society. After all, let's remember, where was Osama bin Laden found hiding? In Abbottabad, right next door to Pakistan's version of West Point.
Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
So get ready for it. Evidently, by the end of the month, there's going to be another tax screw job coming down the pipe. This tells you just how afraid House Republicans are at this point. This is really the kind of the admission that they're screwed. You've got the House leadership who's planning on running tax screw job 2.0, which will make permanent. You remember the state and local tax cap that they put on? They're only going to allow $10,000 of deductions from federal taxes for the money that you pay in state and local taxes. So, like if you live in New Jersey or New York or Massachusetts or another quote unquote high tax state, let's say you pay $15,000 a year in property taxes, which is not unthinkable in New Jersey. 10,000 is all you're going to be able to deduct. And they're doing this specifically to hurt blue states because they understand, look, if we can get them slashing budgets and we can get those people angry about having to pay higher taxes, maybe we can get, who knows, whatever the hell their thinking is. But we could starve those blue states of resources. That's the thought. And the thing is they're going to sacrifice some of the Republicans in those states because either they vote against it and tick off the leadership, or they vote for it and tick off their constituents. And if they vote against it, you're going to tick off a bunch of the money stream people. So all the campaign donations could dry up. But to me, it's kind of telling that they're going to rush this through, much like they did with the last one. They're going to ram this through solely to get it done before the election because they know their days are numbered. They know that, oops, we're done. And Trump's the guy who did it. Trump broke it. And I do see them at some point then turning on him and pointing the finger at him and running against him, which should be fun to watch. It really, really, really should be fun to watch. So there you go. If you haven't read the op-ed that came out today by the anonymous source, by all means do. I immediately, when I read it, said, this is probably something Pence wrote because he's bucking to move up. Evidently, the Twitter sphere is going crazy over the word toadstool, which evidently has come up as part of the whole conversation. And evidently something that was put forth simply to distract. I know Donald Trump is still awake. I know he's walking the halls. I know he's pacing. I know the orange is inflamed. And that's going to make me sleep a little bit better, a little sounder. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of the program, you can download the website right there at thericksmithshow.com. You get the podcast there. Also on the iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, all of that. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming like the tide of flood beneath